Class today, Baruch Hashem. We have the very, very interesting ethical dilemma that we're going to speak about. The question of whether one is allowed to steal to save one's life. But more specifically, we usually start off with a little scenario. And the scenario is if you have, let's say, a baby that needs a medicine, and the doctor... They're not allowing anybody to get this medicine. But you know the medicine's available, and with that medicine, you could save your child. But for whatever reason, it might not have exactly the approvals or whatever, but otherwise, the child's going to die, right? And if you have a chance to say, can you go break into the pharmacy or break into the doctor's house or break into the inventor's house and steal the medicine to save your child? Is that considered ethical? All right? To save a life, we know it's an important thing, but are you allowed to steal to save one's life? Right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, actually, it was a real story. This story actually is a real story, and it happened in our family. What was the story? It wasn't quite about stealing, but it was pretty close to it. My brother-in-law, who just celebrated Baruch Hashem his 60th birthday. So Goldie's brother. He's a rabbi today in Chabad of Riverdale. So he was very sick when he was a little boy, and it was like an illness that the doctors didn't know what to do with it. And my father-in-law didn't know what to do, so he went to the Rebbe. He went to the Rebbe and he barged into his office and said, I need to save my son. There's nothing, the doctors have given up hope and they can't do anything. So the Rebbe says, I think that there might be a doctor somewhere in Manhattan that just developed a medicine in this field. And this could save your child's life. My father says, who, what? They never told him the name of the doctor. First, it's a credible thing that Rabbi Sheba knew some obscure medicine somewhere in Manhattan. Anyways, so my father-in-law, he doesn't stop. He's a very lively guy. He went right down to the doctor's place, and the secretary says, if you want to see this doctor, you have to wait. My father-in-law says, it's life and death. He just walked past the secretary. He went right into the doctor's office.
Surprised that your father didn't do something like that.
Right, exactly. If you know my father-in-law. Anyways, so he goes into the doctor, and the doctor says, what are you here for? He says, my son has this and this sickness, and this illness, and no one has a medicine. And the Rebbe told me that you have developed some medicine that perhaps could save my son's life. So the fellow said, how does the Rebbe know that? How does he? How do you know? So he says he's a holy man. He knows things a lot of people don't know. And then the doctor says, but I'm sorry. He says, it's very nice the rabbi knows my secrets. He said, but I can't give you the medicine. Father says, what? How can you not give me the medicine? My son, his life is dependent on it. He says, well, I will lose my license if I gave it to you. Because we don't have yet the final FDA approvals. And if I don't have that, I can't give it to you. And if I give it to you, I could be sued. And my father said, you saved my son's life. He said, sorry. My father was a very resourceful guy. Pulled the doctor to the side, says, look, let me ask you something. FDA, all these things. If it was your child, right here, lying right here on the floor, and you knew that this medicine could save the child's life, what would you do? It's life and death over here. My child is going to die tomorrow if you don't give me that medicine. So the doctor called him to the back. He pulled the medicine out. And like I said, my brother-in-law is now 60 years old, just celebrated 60th birthday 2 days ago. And this is an incredible miracle. It happened because the Rebbe sent, first of all, but also because the doctor, he didn't steal, but he didn't follow the FDA protocol, and he gave up on it because he knew how important it was to save a life.
Was that doctor by any chance Jewish or not?
I believe he was. I believe he was a Jewish doctor. It's a real story, Okay. But now we're asking something a little bit more, not just the FDA approval, but we're talking about stealing. Can you go break into a pharmacy? If you know they have somewhere in the back or in a doctor's office, if let's say the doctor said no, would my father-in-law be able to, would he be allowed to go and break into this doctor's house and find the medicine and schlep it out and to save a life? Are you allowed to do that? Is that permissive? That's it. Well, huh?
With respect, I know your father-in-law, he would have broken it.
But doesn't mean it's right. The question we're asking here, is it morally right? So we're going to look a little bit about what the Torah holds about. We know there are 613 mitzvot that you're supposed to do, right? But the greatest mitzvah of all is saving a life. So when the two things come in clash, right? Well, you have a mitzvah that you're supposed to do, and on the other side you have saving one's life. So let's say you have during the Holocaust and things like that. The only way a person was able to save himself was by eating a shtickle chazer. A pizza, like a mamish, like a schmaltzy pizza. And they had religious Jews, right? So, we know that the law is that you're allowed to break all the laws of the Torah, mostly, all of them, to save a life. Because as Jews, pikuach nefesh, to save a life, is the greatest thing. Like it says about Shabbos, it says it's rather break one Shabbos and be able to keep many more Shabbos afterwards, right? You have that principle. That's regarding Shabbos. But regarding all the mitzvahs, the Torah says that you shall live by the mitzvahs. The mitzvah of the mitzvahs are there, so you shall live by them, not that you shall die by them. So you have to be prepared to live by the mitzvahs, but not to go to the extreme where you're going to die for it. So there were actually pious Jews during the war that were found dead with a piece of horse meat in their hand. So in other words, they didn't want to eat the tray for meat, right? So they said to themselves, when they get very hungry, they'll eat it. So they kept holding it. I can't eat a piece of horse's meat, right? So I'll wait till I'm dying. But when you're already dying, it's already too late. You know what I'm saying? So they were so weak already, they couldn't lift it and put it in their mouth. So the Torah says, let's give a look at the first source. It says, it's a verse from Leviticus, the third book of the 5 books of Moses. It says, you shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which human beings shall live. I am God, right? So if you give a look in the Hebrew, you'll see the word chai. It's like the next 3 or 4 words from the end. It says, you all know it's a famous line in Halacha, v'chai behem. Chai means, you all know what the chai is. Chai means to live, right? So there's a mitzvah in the Torah, v'chai behem, you shall live by them, by the mitzvot, and not die by them. So mitzvahs have to bring chai, has to bring life. If a mitzvah, a commandment, is gonna bring you to death, then you don't need to follow those commandments. So the question now is, where does theft fall in, right? Is theft like one of those mitzvahs that we're talking about here? Okay. Now, we know that as Jews, we know, and it's a famous thing, it's brought in the Talmud, it's also brought in Maimonides, which I'm going to quote over here, that there are 3 exceptions to this rule. That although we normally say that a person shall live by the mitzvot and not die by them, that we're allowed to break Shabbos to bring somebody to the hospital, to break Shabbos, do whatever you have to. The doctor can do everything they want to break Shabbos, man. You're allowed to eat a piece of chazer. You're allowed to do every commandment, break every violation of the Torah. But there's 3 exceptions. One of them, we know that Jews throughout the millennium have died rather than to bow down to an idol or bow down to a cross. Because it says, and you shall love God and serve Him with all your life. In other words, if a Gentile puts a gun to your head and tells you, either you accept idolatrous religion or we kill you, Jews have died over the ages for that purpose, and that's with the source. So although we normally say that you don't transgress on commandments, you have to live by the commandments, but there always was, instead of like when the Christians tried to, in 1492 they tried making the Jews, so the Jews says they're running away, and when they didn't let them run away, they were ready to die on the auto de fe. They were burnt on the stake because rather not to accept Catholicism, whatever, the cross, or the idolatrous religions. Okay, which religion? What religion? I don't know if that applies to Islam or things like that, but that's a whole subject on its own, and this is not the subject today. But what we're going to talk about is the one exception is idolatry, and there's 2 more exceptions. One is when someone puts a gun to your head and says, either you kill someone else or we kill you. Okay, that's a hard thing to do. There was a lot of that in the Holocaust. A lot of those situations. There were books that were written about people. The Nazis said, either you kill the other Jew or I kill you, kind of, right? Many, many stories of that. So what does the Talmud say? The Talmud says that we're supposed to die rather than kill someone else. Because who is to say that your blood is redder than the other person? That's the language of the Talmud. Famous line. Who is to say that that your blood is redder than the other person? So therefore, when you put into a situation where you don't know which way to go, right, whether to kill someone else or kill yourself, have yourself killed, you say, let yourself be killed. You just don't do anything, right? You just stop, right? Because you don't have a right to go kill somebody else. So you just don't do anything, and then the person kills you. That's the way in that moral dilemma, what one needs to do. That's the second exception, and the third exception is, and it's an interesting one, is it says that rape is compared to murder in the Torah. And it says that if someone puts a gun to your head and says rape somebody, so the man that points a gun, or a man or a woman points a gun to a guy and says rape that woman, right? It says you or else I shoot you. It says you can't do that. That's interesting. The Torah says that rape is compared to murder. There's a pasuk in the Torah that says that it's like murdering someone. In other words, if you take away the dignity, the honor, the respect of that human being by raping them, that's like murdering them. It's like killing their soul. And therefore the Talmud says that that's the third exception. That even if it's life and death, and even if the gun is at your head and you know you're going to be killed, rather die than to hurt someone in such a deep way, right? Rather than humiliate, desecrate another human being, right? Interesting thing. So those are the only 3 exceptions. We don't see an exception for theft, which would appear that you are allowed to steal. So, for instance, a guy, it's hunger, it's a Great Depression, and your family's starving, and there's a bagel in the window, right? And you could save your family's life with the bagel. So it would appear, since that's not it's not one of the 3 exceptions, that one would be allowed to do that. But it's, like I'm saying, it's not so simple. It's not so simple. That, but if you want to know the end of the class, that is the halacha. But there are numerous questions about that, and we're going to discuss it and go through it and see what, how this exactly works. But I just want to point over here. If you give a look at the second footnote, it says the entire house of Israel commanded regarding the sanctification of God's name. Right? It's on the first page of this, though. You see, it's on the first page, though. Yeah. On the first page, second footnote, yeah. The entire house of Israel commanded regarding the sanctification, and I should be sanctified amidst the children of Israel. Also, they want against desecrating His holy name, right? You have to sanctify God's name. You know how to desecrate. What is implied? Should a Gentile arise and force a Jew to violate one of the Torah's commandments at the pain of death? He should violate the commandment rather than be killed. Remember, we said that before. But most commandments, you rather violate the commandment than be killed. Now, the Rambam says an interesting thing. He says, and if someone says, "Well, I want to be pious. I don't want to eat the piece of chazer. I want to be a holy person." Right? Most people, the halach is you don't have to die for it. But I want to be a martyr. And I want to be someone special. I don't want to break Shabbos for it. I don't want to violate one of the violations. I want to die. So the Rambam at the end over here says, if a person dies rather than transgress, he is held accountable for his life. You understand? Yeah. That if you don't eat the piece of chazer, you're held by God accountable. It's like you killed yourself. That's how powerful it is, right? That he says, when the Torah says that you shouldn't die for these commandments, it's not just a nice thing to do, right? You're not allowed to. And if you do choose, Rambam holds, it's considered like suicide, right? You're not a martyr. You're not a martyr in Judaism. Now, not everybody agrees to Rambam on this, by the way. There were certain rabbis that felt that even though you don't have to, but if you want to, you can be. Now, there were certain times in Jewish history where the Jews, they stood up for certain things, and they said we're not going to give in at all, because they saw that this was part of a big plot, a big plan to destroy Judaism. So there were many Jews that did die for lesser things than just idolatry or murder. But according to the Rambam, and that's probably the main halacha, is that no, you have to transgress rather than die for it. But the Rambam goes on to say in the next halacha, for all the other mitzvahs, when does this apply? With regard to other mitzvahs, with the exception of worship of other gods, forbidden sexual relations, and murder. Because that's what we discussed already, right? Those are the only three exceptions. Now the question is, what about theft? And in Talmudic literature, there is talk about if someone is chasing someone else to kill them, right? That's called a rodef. Someone's chasing that person, right? So it says that the person that the person is in self-defense, if they can't save themselves by shooting the guy in the foot or something like that, or punching him in the nose, right? If the only way of saving yourself, your life, is by firing a gun back, it's self-defense. You're allowed to. In Judaism, it's called. So the rodef is a person. Now the Talmud goes even further and says, if you see someone chasing someone else, it's not yourself. It's a third person, second and third person. You're watching them, right? And you see a person chasing someone else, you're allowed to shoot the person that's in the process. Well, yeah. If it says so, it says if you could shoot the person in the leg or in the nose or whatever, and stop them from doing it, right? Or you could scare them off. It's good. But if you can't, there's no other way to stop them. And Hashem knows what you're able to do. The only way to stop them from murdering the other person is by killing them. Then you're allowed to do that. That's called the law of Roidif. It's quite a famous thing. It's quoted in many places. This piece of the Talmud, that you're allowed to, when you see someone in pursuit, and you can't stop them any other way, you're allowed to kill. Now, the Talmud goes on to speak about what about, okay, so you can kill the person, but can you steal their gun? Shoot them with the gun, right? Or can you break their, you know what I mean, like when you're shooting something, right? And you break their in the process, you damage their things, right? So are you responsible? Okay, you're allowed to kill the person, but are you responsible to pay back the family for the house that you blew up, or the possessions of that person that was in pursuit, right? It sounds like Gaza, if you ask me, right? Or stuff like that, right? What's going on in Israel, a lot of these things, right? So even though if you're allowed to do it, so it says that that person himself, the pursuer, the murderer that you're stopping, if you happen to also damage his things, you're exempt from that. You don't have to pay for that because that was in the process, right? That person would have been put to death anyways. So everything that he owns is also not is free for all kind of thing. But the Talmud said, but what about if in the process of trying to save the person, you damage a third house or a third party's possessions, right? Along the way. So an example is over there. If somebody's there and a third person, another person's there, and you're being pursued by someone, right? And you go to another person, you grab his gun. A third person, you grab the gun, and you use the gun, and the gun gets blown up, and it was an expensive weapon. Do you have to now pay back the person that you stole it from, right? Huh? Yeah. You have to pay. And the question is, are you allowed to even? Are you allowed to steal from? So this is the case we're talking about, right? You're stealing from somebody to save your life. Right? That's what we say. Can you take a gun? Someone else's gun, or someone else's weapon, someone else's knife, or someone else's whatever it is, right? You're in pursuit. Someone's killing you.
Just a minute, I got lost there.
Yeah.
You're allowed to pay.
Go ahead, ask.
This is
Go ahead.
lost.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get
Yeah.
lost.
Yeah.
You can take someone's gun to shoot someone who's chasing another person. They're not chasing you.
Right. Correct.
So yours.
Yeah, but now do you have to pay the person that you stole it from? Question. That's the question. Are you liable?
Okay, because you're not. It's not yourself you're saving. It's the third.
It's not because it's a third person you're saving, but it's because. So in the Talmud it speaks about when you're saving yourself, and you're taking now this weapon or whatever it is from a third person that's not involved, right? Or you break their window to be able to get something, and you did some damages along the way. Mm-hmm. So the Talmud says that if it is to save someone else, we don't hold you responsible. Why? Because if they'll tell you that you're going to have to pay for damages, that you'll never save someone else's life. Right? But for yourself, the Talmud says you do have to pay. If you were doing it to save yourself, even though you were allowed to take that, break their window or do whatever it is, but you have to pay for it. You have to pay for it. If you're stealing something from someone else to save yourself, not a third person.
Right, that's your own liability.
So that's your liability, and the Talmud says that you need to pay for it. Why? Because for someone else, there was a rabbinical law that said it's not a problem. If you're trying to save someone else, you should be allowed to make damages, whatever means, because otherwise you'll never do it. If you find out, you're going to be held liable. But for yourself, the real law is that you need to pay up.
But morally,
Huh?
the person you save, I saved your life,
Right.
you should offer to pay.
Yeah. Yeah. If right. Yeah, that's a nice thing to do. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. Because
But why
he
wouldn't you
didn't
want-
ask, huh?
Why wouldn't you want to make right for the wrong that you did, even though you were saving another life? You still got somebody involved who had nothing to do with it.
Correct. That's a good question. Can you, right, that's the question. So, therefore we say that if it's to save yourself, you have to pay up for it. If to save someone else, the sages said that you don't need to pay because that was a way that they put into place this establishment that you don't need to pay, that you're totally not liable, so that people should want to save other people. Because otherwise,
You saved the life.
you save the life, right? Otherwise people will say, I'm not going to go get myself into trouble. I'm not going to go break anything to save someone else if I'm going to be held financially responsible. But for yourself, we could be sure that you're going to. So the sages. So that means the real halach is that although you are allowed to take something from someone else, steal something to save a life, but you have to pay for it. That's an important law. That's an important law, because it could be a lot of money also, in different cases. If you we'll talk about cases later where you're an accountant and you were made to sign on a contract to save your own life, and the person said, if you don't sign this, right, we'll kill you. And now $1 million the other guy lost because of you. So it might cost you a lot of money if you're held liable for saving your own life. Right? We're going to get to that case a little bit later, but the halacha is at the end that if it's to save your own life, you can't take someone else's money to save your own life unless you're planning on paying back. If you're paying back, then it's not a real theft in a way,
Right.
because you're saving a life, which is important. But it's also, you're not really stealing, because most people, if they know you're going to pay back, right, and you're saving a life, that they're not going to. So the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Lubavitch, talks about it in his quote of Jewish law. He says, and now, what if you don't have money? You're a poor person, right? And you don't have that kind of money to pay for whatever it is. He says you're still allowed to take something from someone else, because you can go to work and you can pay over a period of time, over a longer period of time. So even if you don't have the money in the bank, you don't have the money in your pocket, he says that's fine, as long as you're intending to pay it back sometime. Okay? So that's important. So the important law over here is that although a life and death situation overrides the law against theft, but you still need to pay back. One needs still to pay back, and it's not a complete exoneration. Right? It's only an exoneration from the evil act. It's not considered theft, but one still needs to pay back the damages. You need to pay back the damages. In some other, by the way, I think in British law, some other laws, you're totally exonerated. Jewish law, not. In other law systems, if you did it to save someone else's life, you're exonerated to the point that you don't have to pay back the debt that you created. Remember, we're talking about the third person that you're taking from over here, right? Another person that had nothing to do with the situation. If it's from the murderer himself, then it's okay, because he sort of loses all rights for everything, because he's the person that's instigating the murder. But if you're damaging a third party, right? You're going past someone's house, and the only way you can save yourself from the murderer is by going through that person's house and breaking all the windows and making a mess and and going out the other side. Now do you have to pay for what you've damaged?
It's willful.
Huh?
It's willful.
Right. It's willful, but it's also to save your life. That was the only way you understood that you could save your life. So there is no theft. You're not breaking God's will. You're not a ganef. Right? You're not a ganef. But you still have to pay back, according to Jewish law. According to some other, unless it's the house of the murderer, the house of the, then it's okay, because he loses all rights. But because he really should be put to death according to Jewish law. So if you're put to death, you lose all your rights to anything that you own, anyways, right? But this is quite an interesting concept, that you're still held responsible. Like I said, in British law, I believe, or some other law systems, you're totally even if you damage a third person, you are held. You're not held. I'm sorry. In some other law systems, you're not held responsible. In Judaism, it's not so simple. So even though you're allowed to do whatever you did, but you can't. So in the case of the medicine, right, you would be allowed to steal the medicine to save your child's life, according to Jewish law. But you'd have to pay for the medicine, and you have to pay for the broken cabinet, right, or whatever you did, the damages you did. Right? So Judaism actually is very ethical. Right?
And if you can't afford the
Huh?
medicine, if you're a poor person,
A poor person, right. If you're a poor person, you still would be allowed to do it, but you should plan on working hard next couple of years and paying back eventually. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. That's why I brought to the Reb Shnei Zalman Liadi. He brings that although it says that you have to pay back, he said it doesn't have to be money that you have in the bank. It has to be that you take a commitment on yourself one day to pay it back, which is a big difference. Now.
There's another way that he could have handled
Huh?
that.
Yeah.
There's another way that FDA could have been handled.
Yeah.
And that is you leave it on the counter and walk out of the room.
Yeah, that's probably what he did, by the way. That's probably what he did. The doctor.
they're not going to hand it over.
He didn't hand it over. He showed them where it was in the
Yeah.
cabinet. Yeah, for sure.
The doctor could have put him on a clinical
Huh?
trial. The doctor could have put the patient on a clinical trial.
Perhaps it wasn't even at that point yet. Perhaps it was still in the
Show him
very.
where it was and walk.
Huh? Yeah,
Give it to him.
Akasha v'maisa. There's a question on the story. That's the story. Yes. Okay, but that's the FDA. But we're talking about breaking in and actually. So in halacha they talk about a guy that's let's say a vagabond or whatever, or homeless, and that whatever they have is like stolen property. They don't have anything of their own. They're like they're known. They have a reputation. This person has a reputation. He's a homeless. So can you go and chop something from that person? Is that considered theft if it doesn't really belong to him? Everything he has is in halachic books they talk about everything, right? So the question is, like a person goes and steals from a homeless, is it considered theft? But the answer is, well, since the person is homeless, so every loaf of bread that they stole was permitted, right? Because they stole it so they should be able to live. To koch nefesh. So since they stole it for koch nefesh, so now it's theirs. So it's not considered stolen objects. So therefore you can't take it from them. It's an interesting sort of way of looking at it, right? So someone that's a total like a homeless, that that they're just stealing from one place to the other, they're doing it to live. They're not considered ganovim. Everything they're doing is to make a living, is to not make a living, to live. So this story, in the Tanakh, there's a very interesting story of King David. King David once walked into the Beis Medrash, and he had those, just like today we have problems with the Palestinians. So they had problems in those days with the Philistines. So this is an interesting story that's brought in the Talmud. King David came in and asked this particular question. He asked the question that we're asking right now. And I'll show you in a moment. It's in the Gemara. What was the question? The question was they had the Philistines, and they were trying to get them because they were making a lot of trouble. I don't know if they wanted to kill them but they were hiding amongst the stalks of wheat and barley of a Jewish farmer. So King David came into the Beis Medrash, where they were learning the Talmud, whatever, and he asked them, am I allowed to go now and burn the crops, whatever, right? So that the stalks of wheat, so that the Philistines will be exposed, and I'll be able to catch them to save the Jews. So it was war. It was pekuach nefesh. But King David asked that question. He asked, am I allowed to go and destroy the farmers' fields in order to maybe in those days they had tunnels too. Maybe they were hiding in tunnels underneath. Famous story before the story with Gaza. This must have been a place maybe 10 years ago or something. And they were already digging the tunnels, and they came out of Gaza, and suddenly the soldiers they noticed from far that these guys were coming out of the tunnels, and they went after them. They caught them, and they asked them, "What do you guys? What happened? How did you guys end up here?" They said, "Well, we thought there were a lot of crops over here, so we built the tunnels to come out here." They didn't realize it was before Pesach, and they cut all the wheat of that whole area in front of Gaza. It's had to make matzahs, right? So they cut down all the stalks of wheat. So right when they came out, the Gazans they were exposed because all the wheat was gone. So this is a similar thing. King David asked this 3,000 years ago. King David asked the question: King David asked, "Am I allowed to, for war purposes, to go and save the Jews from the Philistines? Can I go and burn the crop of the Jewish people who are innocent in order to save?" So that's here.
The answer
What was
is.
the answer?
What's the answer?
I'll show you. Okay, I'll show you what the answer is. That's why I'm really trying to. Okay, I'll show you the answer to the Gemara because it's a long thing. If you look at where it says Baba Kama 60b,
What page?
the next page, next 2 pages. You see on top of the page it says Baba Kama 60b on top of the page. See it? Where it says Rav Huna stated a different explanation of the verse. See that?
Yeah.
Huh?
There's two.
So we're learning a little bit Gemara over here. For those who want to see the Gemara online, here they are. Okay. Rav Huna stated a different explanation of the verse. You see that? You see it on top of a page? Okay. Got it? Yeah, Rav Huna stated a different explanation of the verse. The verse that we spoke about with the stalks of wheat, right? There were stacks of barley belonging to Jews in which the Philistines were hiding, right? And David wanted to burn down the stacks to kill the Philistines and save his own life. He raised the dilemma: what is the halacha? I don't know when he had the time to go into the Beis Medrash and ask the question. You know what I mean? But those days, they were always studying. So they said, what is the halacha? Is it permitted to save oneself by destroying the property of another? So I guess it was just David with the Philistines the case, right? It wasn't all of the Jewish people. So the Philistines were after him. So his question was he allowed to burn down the stalks of wheat of a third party of Jews in order to save his life? And so they answered, Bava Kama 60b, you see this, the next paragraph, right? You see that? They send the following answer to him. Listen to this. It is prohibited to save one's life by destroying the property of another. Yeah, so they were saying over here. No? Now some say, and obviously since the halacha is that you are allowed to go and steal, like I told you before, to save a life. Some say that over here it wasn't so clear cut. He could have gone through other places. He could have done other things. He didn't necessarily have to go in those particular fields. But over there in that Gemara he says people are not allowed, but you are a king, and a king may breach the fence of an individual. It's like government. The government is allowed to come in and build a road right on your property. They can expropriate it. Why? Because all of ownership really belongs to the king. And it's the same thing as in civil law today. The government gives everyone the rights to have property. But if the government needs the property for something which they feel is very important, they can expropriate from you the property if they need a road for the benefit of everybody else. So King David, who was the king of all kings, and so he had the rights of a king. So they said that even though normally the rabbis would not have allowed someone to burn down those fields, but King David had the right because he's the king, in order to form a path for himself, and none may protest his action. Normal halachot of damage do not apply to you since you are the king. Okay, that's this. But many commentaries on that Gemara, and at the end, remember we said the halacha is that you are allowed to damage someone else's properties to save a life. If it's clearly to save a life. Over there, you'll see in the commentaries they're not sure whether it was to save a life or not to save a life. But the halacha is. I'm just bringing this story because it's a very interesting sort of story that happened with King David. I mean, this is like 3,000 years ago. Now we come to another case, another Gemara, like we're going through the whole Talmud here. every case where you find that they stole an order. So this is a case where Talmud speaks about if there's a contract. In most contracts in the olden days, they used to have two witnesses. That's the way they used to work it. Still have it today on the ketubah and everything. So that's the way the olden days, and still today, there's always witnesses that sign at the bottom of a contract. So the Talmud in Kesubos talks about a question. If the witnesses come and say that this contract is not a good contract. It says in the contract that Reuven owes Shimon $200, right? Then the witnesses show up and say, it's not a real contract. We were gamblers at the time, and the halacha is that if you're a gambler, you can't be a witness, right? Or they came and said, we were really related to the people involved, or different things that they could come and say that we were not kosher witnesses. So we say they're not believed. They're not believed because a person cannot. When a person comes and says that they are less than perfect, there must be an ulterior motive. A person comes and says, "I'm a rasha, I'm an evil person, I'm a gambler, there must be something involved. We don't trust the person." No person normally comes and discredits themselves. If a person comes and discredits themselves, you need to have witnesses to discredit the witnesses. But the witnesses themselves must have an ulterior motive, and therefore they're not trusted. Because no one can come and discredit themselves unless there's some kind of other motive involved. So we don't trust the person. If there's two witnesses, even if the witnesses come and say we were not kosher witnesses at the time, they still believe. And now in that same piece of the Talmud it says, and let's say the witnesses come and say that we were forced to sign the document. Someone put a gun to our head and we signed the document. So that's an interesting sort of case. And so the Gemara says, okay, so they're also in that case. They're not discrediting themselves, because if someone puts a gun to your head, you're not supposed to sign. You're allowed to sign it. You're allowed to sign a false document if someone puts a gun to your head, because as we said before, you're allowed to steal if it's a life and death situation. But then comes there's one rabbi there, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says no. You are discrediting yourself. Because you're not allowed to steal money from someone, even if it's life and death. So there's one opinion there, Rav Meir, not everybody agrees to it. As I said, the halacha at the end doesn't accept Rav Meir's opinion. But Rav Meir says, no, that is discrediting yourself. That is considered discrediting yourself, because if you're a real accountant, you don't sign the document, right? Even if a gun is to your head, if that's not the right thing. So to come and say, I was forced to do it, that you're discrediting yourself, so therefore you're not believed. So, anyways, that's more or less the scenario of the Gemara. I just wanted to bring this case over here. This is an important case. Is one allowed to sign a contract for Madoff or for somebody else, right?
If you knew.
If they put the gun to your head, they say they're going to, or somebody comes and says, or the mafia comes to you and says, we're going to kill your children, chas v'shalom. If you don't sign the bottom line, are you allowed to sign it? Save it? And then comes the second question. Even if we say you're allowed to sign it, because it's life and death, do you now become responsible to pay the losses that you've brought onto people as a result of you signing the false document?
So should you not sign it?
No, we know the halacha is, like I told you before, that at the end of everything, that today, Kol Jewish law says, for life and death, you are allowed to sign it. But perhaps you might have to work the rest of your life to pay off. It's the same saying. It's the same thing that we were saying all along. Like in the Talmud, you see many different opinions, but at the end, you are responsible. You are responsible. So, just to so we see King David dealt with it. Rameya dealt with it. Talmud talks about it, right? So in all these cases, when the person is running after the other person to kill them, right? So we see all these possible cases. But in the end, like I said, what is the final word? Anybody know what time it is now?
After 9.
Okay. So what is the final word? The final word on this whole thing is, are you allowed to steal a loaf of bread to save your family? Yes. Do you have to pay for the loaf of bread?
No.
If you can.
You should pay. Well, it's to save you, just to save your kids. But if to save yourself, right?
But
If to
are
save
you
yourself, you do have to pay for
But
it.
are you liable over the next period of time?
Yeah, right. You don't have to pay right away.
Right.
So if it's the Great Depression, you should pay it.
You are then
Huh?
liable. at some point.
Right.
You're weak.
And I told you the story. I told you the famous story of Figarelli LaGuardia. I told you. Remember I told you that story? But it's this story, right? About a guy during the Great Depression that stole a loaf of bread to live. And he was brought in front of LaGuardia. And that's what LaGuardia said. The Mr. Mayor, but before he was a mayor, he was a judge in a night court. And they came to him, and they brought this guy that stole the loaf of bread, and LaGuardia says, yeah, I understand where you're coming from, you're stealing to live, that's fine. He says, but you still have to pay for it. You have to pay, and that's because I have to pay. We said, you're still responsible, you stole it to save your life, but why should the baker man lose out on it? So you have to pay him back. But he was a very smart guy, LaGuardia. He turned around at everybody in the room. He says, and what kind of society are we living in today? That people have to steal a loaf of bread to live? Why aren't we helping each other out? He says, I fine everybody in this room a penny. In those days, there was 10 people in the room. I fine everyone a penny. Put it into the pot so the man could pay his 10 cents for it. So he says, yes, he's guilty. He has to pay for it. He's not guilty, but he has to pay for the loaf. But everybody in the room is responsible as well. They all put the money into the hat and paid up for the loaf of bread. That's a smart guy. Huh? It's like a That's why they named the worst airport after him. Now they rebuilt the airport, but it's still the worst airport in the world. You always, I'm always stuck there in LaGuardia. It is, but but it's a beautiful idea. So see, that's the halacha. LaGuardia was following the halacha. He said, yeah, we can't hold you responsible. You were doing it, you're allowed to, but you still have to pay back. Like the Alter Rebbe said, you don't pay right away, you pay later, but you have to pay it back. And at the same time also, he said, the society should be held responsible for the homeless. And the society should pitch in. Yes, they're responsible for their theft, but we need to help each other out. And that's where welfare came in. So my friends, that works with the medicine, that works with a loaf of bread, that works with stealing the rifle to save your life. You're stealing a rifle. Yeah. You're allowed to steal it to save your life, but then you have to give the guy back a brand new rifle, or
A bullet.
or pay for the bullet.
Pay for the ammunition, rocket.
Pay for the ammunition. Yeah, question. Yeah.
So, like, based on the rule where you said about saving someone else's life and saving one's own life,
Right.
liability, right?
Right.
So does that mean that like our society, the justice system is that biased, where they'll just extract certain things out of Torah or the Bible and use it for their own justification?
Yeah, people sometimes use these things for their own justification, but the morality is pretty clear.
Yeah, my rabbi
Yeah,
used the morality.
yeah.
The judge just chooses certain things.
Well, he picks and chooses, man. But he was a wise guy. He was wise. He felt three things. It's wrong. Is it wrong? No, it's not wrong. You have to save the life. That comes first. Do you have to pay back for it? Yes. That's the right thing to do, to pay back. And then the third thing is that society has to help out a little bit for the homeless people to be able to live. You have all three things. Huh?
It's no good putting him in jail because he'll never be able to be
Yeah. But again, he did not really violate "Thou shalt not steal,"
Right.
and part of that is because he's going to pay back under these. So normally it says you're not allowed to steal somebody's object, even if you're going to pay them back. You can't go steal somebody's car and say, I'll eventually get them another car, or I'll pay them back. That's theft. But in dire circumstances, where life and death is on the line, then you can take this circle and say, yeah, I'm stealing it, but I'm going to pay him back. So then it's not considered a theft. If you're not planning on paying it back, then it is a theft. Then it is a theft. Right?
I got one more question.
Yeah.
In somewhere like America, not somewhere like in Israel, when you have like the two laws, is there certain circumstances where they actually have to get like a rabbi to justify certain
And
things?
sometimes they call rabbis into the court.
Right, that's
Yeah.
I've been called into court sometimes as a witness about the laws.
But
I remember one time there was a law over here in Canada. Only the LCBOs let us sell wine. It's changing now, right? But for many years, only the LCBOs allowed. The only other people that could sell wine is sacramental wine dealers. So remember, we all used to go to they were only supposed to sell to the shuls and but everyone used to go to chop a few bottles. I don't know if it was 100% kosher, but whatever. But the government got onto it. The Ontario government got onto it, and they got a hold of I think it was Mazel wines at the time, and they brought them to court. They said, how could you be selling so many bottles of wine? So I remember Rabbi Shechet Olav Shalom. He told me that he was called in as a witness, and he came in, and the judge said, "How's this possible that that he's selling so many bottles for sacramental wine?" The rabbi explained. He says, but in the churches, sacramental wine, they give you a little drop of wine. Everybody gets a little drop of wine. He said, but the Jews, he says it's totally different. We drink a lot of wine. He said, what every Jew. Friday night, every Jew has to drink a whole glass of wine for Kiddush. So you know how many Jewish people? There's 200,000 Jews in Toronto, whatever. There's 200,000 glasses of wine just that one night, and then you have to have another glass of wine for Havdalah, and then you need to have wine for Bris, for for a wedding, for this. And then you have to have every Jew, Pesach, it comes Pesach night, not one bottle, everyone has to drink a whole bottle themselves, 4 glasses of wine. By the time the rabbi finished the mathematics of how much wine the Jews will drink, he says, they're barely selling what the Jews have to drink.
It's a shortage.
It's a shortage. But he wasn't saying the whole truth because Jews just have to taste. They have to taste it. Not everyone has to drink a whole glass of wine, but regardless, the rabbi told what the optimal halacha is that everybody should drink a full 4 ounces of.
He forgot Shabbos lunch.
Huh?
He forgot Shabbos lunch.
Shabbos lunch, yeah, it's Kiddush Shem too, yeah.
That's called bending the law.
Vending is you're just presenting the law. It is.
Right.
Okay.
Good.
Thank
Thank you very much.
See you guys. Zeig is up and
I
stark.
have a question from way back at the beginning.
Huh?
I have a question from way back at the beginning.
Yeah.
You want